The graveyard is a place you typically want to avoid your cards going to. This makes cards that can be useful in your graveyard interesting and inherently powerful. So today, we're going to go over the best Magic the Gathering cards that actually want to be in your graveyard. Starting us off at number 10, we have Gravecrawler. Gravecrawler is a 2/1 zombie with a mana cost of 1 black that can't block, but can be cast from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie. One of the first things you think of when you see Gravecrawler is probably put it in some kind of zombie tribal deck alongside zombie payoffs like Death Baron and Blade Stitch Scab, both of which make your zombies even bigger, to also make Gravecrawler a big, scary creature that keeps coming back. But actually, where Gravecrawler has really shined is in decks that use creatures as a resource. In Magic, there are a lot of cards that let you sacrifice a creature for some benefit, like Altar of Dementia, a 2-mana artifact that allows you to sacrifice a creature to mill for a number of cards equal to its power. Gravecrawler can allow you to pay these costs over and over without really losing anything besides your mana. And with cards like Phyrexian Altar, which allows you to sack a creature for mana as many times you want per turn, you can actually loop Gravecrawler in and out of your graveyard as many times as you want, which you can easily make a win condition. So, why is Gravecrawler only at number 10? The biggest issue with Gravecrawler is that it needs another zombie on the field in order to do much of anything. Casting it from your hand doesn't do a lot, so Gravecrawler really needs a friend to get the ball rolling. Luckily, a lot of the higher spots on this list help Gravecrawler reach its absolute busted potential. And at number 9, we have Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. This is a 6/6 Elder Giant that has a mana cost of 1 black and 1 red, can be cast from your graveyard by paying 2 black and 2 red mana, and exiling 5 other cards from your graveyard, sacrificing itself when it enters the battlefield unless it was cast this way, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, your opponent discards a card and then loses 3 life if they discarded a land or were empty-handed. Kroxa is a card that's pretty hard to actually get to stay on the field, and while you can cast it from your hand, paying 2 mana to get 1 card out of your opponent's hand, and maybe deal some damage to them isn't a great deal. What makes Kroxa really good is the fact that, once he does come out, he does a lot of damage and will not stay dead. The combined power of the amount of damage Kroxa puts out, and the fact he can come back any number of times has led Kroxa to be a staple in black-red mid-range decks in Modern. These decks are all about trying to outvalue your opponent, and forcing your opponent to use multiple removal spells or block with several creatures to avoid dying to a giant 6/6 Kroxa attacking them can get you a whole lot of card advantage over the course of a game. This inevitability makes Kroxa a very scary card to sit across the table from. The only way to get of Kroxa for good is to exile it, but exile removal always comes at a premium. And at number 8, we have Arclight Phoenix. This 3/2 Phoenix with the mana cost of 3 and red has flying and haste, meaning it can attack as soon as it comes down and can only be blocked by other flying creatures. And it has the ability where at the beginning of your combat step, if you cast 3 instants or sorceries, you can put it from the graveyard directly onto the field. This is a shockingly easy requirement to fulfill. Magic has tons of cards like Opt and Expressive Iteration that allows you to find other cards for cheap. This can allow you to put a whole bunch of Arclights onto the field without losing any cards for as cheap as 3 mana, or even less with cards like Metamorphosis that make mana and count towards the 3 spell total. Phoenix was pretty heavily played in both Modern and Pioneer, but after Faithless Looting got banned in Modern for making graveyard decks too good, since it has a cheap cost to draw and discards 2 cards multiple times, Phoenix stopped seeing play in Modern, though it still sees a good amount of play in Pioneer. In Pioneer, Arclight Phoenix sees play alongside Thing in the Ice to form a strong Izzet tempo deck. Thing in the Ice transforms into a giant 7/8 and bounces each non-horror creature after you cast 4 instants or sorceries, which is a great deal for 2 mana. Together, Thing in the Ice and Arclight Phoenix can put out a ton of damage and control the board, on top of being hard to grind out with counterspells, card advantage pieces, and a strong recurring threat in the form of Arclight Phoenix. And at number 7, we have Vengevine. This 4/3 elemental has a mana cost of 2 and 2 green, has haste, and an ability that returns it from the graveyard to the battlefield whenever you cast your second creature spell each turn. Vengevine is obviously pretty similar to Arclight Phoenix in a number of ways, but what ends up making it the better card is that it's bigger and requires you to cast fewer spells to get it out. Whereas Phoenix really likes cards like Opt, Vengevine saw a lot of play with creature cards that allowed you to fill your graveyard quickly. For a time, Vengevine actually saw play alongside our friend Gravecrawler, who was a creature that also loved being mill, and could trigger Vengevine's ability fairly easily. Nowadays, Vengevine is seen played in Modern and Hollow One decks, which can combine the deck's namesake with cards like Birded Inquiry, which makes each player draw 3 and discard 3 at random, and Goblin Lore, which does basically the same thing, to put a lot of power on the board very quickly. Vengevine fits right at home with the deck's plan of discarding cards and casting creatures. As a result, Vengevine will continue to see played Modern for years to come. And at number 6, we have Prized Amalgam. Prized Amalgam is a 3/3 zombie with a mana cost of 1, a blue, and a black, and the ability where at the beginning of each of your end steps, if a creature entered the battlefield under your control or was cast from your graveyard, you return it to the battlefield tapped. Prized Amalgam may seem like a bit of a win more card, as it only does something after you've already reanimated at least one other creature. But luckily for Prized Amalgam, there are a few creatures allowed to come out for free extremely easily. Narcomoeba is a 1/1 flyer that will return itself from the graveyard to the field if it gets milled, and is one of the easiest ways to get a free creature in all of Magic. And luckily for Prized Amalgam, will allow you to bring out the Amalgam for free. Bloodghast is a 2/1 that can't block that returns from the graveyard to the battlefield anytime you play a land, which is something that players do just about every turn. Due to Narcomoeba and Bloodghast being so easy to reanimate, but not all that threatening, Prized Amalgam is used to put a lot of damage without having to spend much mana. Prized Amalgam and friends see a ton of play in Modern and Dredge decks, the decks that may be the best at filling up its graveyard in all of Magic. And believe me, we'll be talking more about Dredge, just not quite yet. And at number 5, we have Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. Uro is a 6/6 Elder Giant with a mana cost of 1, a green and a blue, that can be cast from your graveyard by paying 2 green and 2 blue and exiling 5 cards from your graveyard, sacrifice itself if it wasn't cast this way when it enters the field, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it allows you to draw a card, put a land into play, and to gain 3 life. Uro is Kroxa's more broken cousin. Whereas Kroxa's enter the battlefield and attack trigger denies your opponent resources, Uro gives you more resources, which is ultimately much stronger. Whereas Kroxa's attack trigger will often do an extra 3 damage in the late game, Uro's will draw you another card, which is also much better. And unlike Kroxa, casting Uro from your hand is often fairly strong. Explore has a nearly identical effect for 1 less mana, but doesn't have the insane upside of being able to kill your opponent later. The combination of being a huge threat, being extremely resilient, and being a fine card to cast in the front end, ended up getting Uro banned in both Pioneer and Modern. Uro still sees some play in Legacy, but the speed of the format stops it from being too oppressive there, so it will still get to see play there for a long time. And at number 4, we have Dread Return. This is a sorcery with a mana cost of 2 and 2 black that returns a target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, but what makes it really unique is the ability to flash it back by sacrificing 3 creatures. This means that if you get 3 creatures out, you can cast Dread Return for no mana from your graveyard. The easiest way to take advantage of this is with our old friend Narcomoeba. By simply milling a significant number of cards, you can put 3 Narcomoebas in play and Dread Return into the graveyard. This will allow you to put just about any creature from your deck directly into play. There are tons of ways to use this to win the game. One of the easiest combos is featured in the Legacy deck, Oops, All Spells. This deck seeks to mill their entire library with Balustrade Spy. Balustrade Spy mills target player until they hit a land, so if you don't run any lands, it will mill your entire deck. In order to cast Balustrade Spy, the deck uses cards like Elvish Spirit Guide, Lotus Petal, and Modal Dual Face lands. Cards which are spells on the front, and therefore spells for the purposes of Balustrade Spy, but lands on the back. Once you deck yourself with Spy, all of your Necromoebas will reanimate themselves, and then you can cast Dread Return to reanimate whatever finisher you want. You could reanimate Lotala the Giant to deal 1 damage for each creature in your graveyard to your opponent, which will be far more than 20. Or you could bring back the Oslo's Oracle, whose Enter the Battlefield trigger will win you the game if the number of cards in your library is less than or equal to the number of blue mana symbols among permanents you control. And since your library has 0 cards in it, even if your Oracle dies, its trigger will still win you the game. This deck can win incredibly quickly, though it is weak to the 0 mana interaction common in Legacy. The insane combo potential of this card has led it to being banned in Modern at the beginning of the format back in 2011, and it's not likely to ever come off the ban list. And at number 3, we have Bridge from Below. This card is an enchantment with a mana cost of 3 black, and it has the abilities where, whenever a non-token creature you control dies while it's in the graveyard, you can make a 2/2 zombie token, and when an opponent's creature dies, you exile it. You may notice that Bridge from Below doesn't actually do anything while it's on the field. This is because Future Sight was a weird set. Now, Bridge from Below is one of those cards that only really has unfair uses. Every time someone plays Bridge from Below, they're trying to combo off and kill you. Bridge from Below was used alongside cards like Gravecrawler and Vengevine to make disgustingly big boards very quickly. Players would play these cards alongside Altar of the Dementia to sacrifice their own creatures and mill themselves to extend their plays even further. Even worse, because all you had to do to turn Bridge from Below on was mill it to your graveyard, you can easily get multiple bridges going at once, allowing one Gravecrawler to quickly turn into a huge board of zombie. Bridge from Below ended up getting banned from Modern for being way too good in Bridgevine decks, though it still sees a good amount to play in Legacy and even Vintage. And at number 2, we have Life from the Loam. Life from the Loam is a sorcery with a mana cost of 1 and a green, and the effect to return up to 3 land cards from your graveyard to your hand. Without a doubt, the most important line of text in this card is its Dredge 3. Dredge is a keyword where if a card with Dredge is in your graveyard, whenever you would draw a card, you can instead mill that number of cards and return that card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, this card is kind of a stand-in for all dredge cards. If we include all of them, they take up half the list, so putting Life from the Loam here as a stand-in is the best option. So why is Dredge so good? Well, as stated earlier, Dredge is maybe the best way in all of Magic to fill up your graveyard quickly. Once you get a single card with Dredge in your graveyard, you can quickly fill it with cards in your next draw step. And you'll likely mill more Dredge cards, so you'll be able to keep the train rolling very easily. Dredge has seen lots of competitive play in just about every Eternal format. In Vintage, it wrecks shop with the amazing card Bazaar Bahad, a land which allows you to tap to draw 2 cards and then discard 3, allowing them to mill a huge number of cards every turn. In Legacy, it cleans house with Lion's Eye Diamond, which allows you to discard your entire hand and sack for 3 mana, allowing them to dump their entire hand on turn 1, and hopefully use the mana to flashback Faithless Looting to get the party started. And in Modern, Dredge flips over half of its deck in turn 2 with Cathartic Reunion, dropping 2 Dredgers in the graveyard and milling, hopefully, 15 cards, if you hit all of your Stinkweed Imps. Once they have the graveyard full, they use creatures that bring themselves back from the graveyard, like Prize Amalgam, Ox of Agonos, and Ikorid to kill their opponent. This was so good that Golgari Grave Troll is actually banned in Modern for making the deck too fast at milling its graveyard, while Life from the Loam remains legal. Now, why did I choose Life from the Loam when Golgari Grave Troll is the best Dredge card for milling? Well, because it has a very unique effect that leads it to seeing play in decks that no other Dredge cards do, specifically Legacy lands. Legacy lands aims to use extremely powerful lands, like the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, to control the game until they can combo off with the Dark Depths and Thespian Sage. The way the combo works is by copying your Dark Depths with Stage, you'll get Dark Depths with no counters on it, and be able to make a 20/20 Merit Lage way faster than you normally could. Life from the Loam sees play as a way to recur strong lands that are destroyed with enemy wastelands, or to find more powerful combo pieces. Now, Life from Loam and Dredge in general are extremely powerful in format warping, but I don't think I've ever seen a more format warping card than the number 1 spot on this list. And at number 1, we have Hogak, Arisen Necropolis. Hogak is an 8/8 avatar with a mana cost of 5 and 2 black/green hybrid mana, and the abilities: you can't pay mana to cast this spell, Convoke, meaning you can tap your creatures to pay for 1 mana each, Delve, meaning you can exile cards from your graveyard to pay for 1 mana each, and it can be cast from your graveyard. So I think we all saw this coming. Hogak was ludicrously powerful in Modern, basically completely destroying the entire format. So why was Hogak so good? The card that really pushed Hogak into the top of the meta was Altar of Dementia. Altar allowed you to sacrifice this card to mill for 8 cards. This would give you more than enough cards to delve away to cast it again, and if you had Birds from Below's in your graveyard, you can get the creatures you needed to pay the Convoke cost. This allowed you to loop Hogak until you either had enough power to kill your opponent, or to simply sack everything to Altar of Dementia and mill your opponent's entire library. Fun fact, this was the combo that got Bridge from Below banned in Modern. Hogak was so good and so consistent that it was basically the only deck in the meta. The meta was so centered around Hogak that players not only started mainboarding Leyline of the Void to counter it, an enchantment which would exile any card that entered your opponent's graveyard and begin the game in play if it was in your opening hand, but they were also mainboarding Force of Vigor, a 0-mana card that could remove artifacts and enchantments to remove opposing Leyline. And even with 8 dead cards in the main board, Hogak was easily the best deck in the entire format until the day it was banned. Now, some of the other cards on this list might be seeing a little more play than Hogak right now, but Hogak's reign of terror was so bad that it easily earns a spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. If you think there's any other cards that we may have missed, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments.